The day they arrested me, I still smelled her perfume on my shirt. It was the same one I bought her for our anniversary, vanilla and something floral, I never learned what. When the cops kicked down my door, I thought it was a mistake. They called me sir at first, then abuser once they read the charge sheet. My wife stood behind them, trembling, tears already rehearsed. The neighbors watched as they cuffed me, their eyes full of disgust. I wanted to scream that I'd never laid a hand on her, that the bruises weren't mine to explain, but lies move faster than truth, and by nightfall, I was already a monster. My job gone. My family silent. My name poisoned. That night, staring through the bars, I made myself a promise. One day, the truth would speak, and when it did, it would destroy everyone who helped bury me. Before we continue the story, tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. I love seeing where my stories reach around the world. They came at dawn, boots loud on the steps like a metronome counting down my life. I remember the dullness in the light, that gray, thin morning that makes everything look guilty. I was still in the shirt I'd slept in, coffee on the counter gone cold. When the first officer pushed the door open he said, "Mr. Hale." And I thought this was a mistake. I opened my mouth to explain and a second officer read a paper and his voice thinned into a name that stopped me cold: domestic assault. Victim, your wife. She stood behind them in the hallway, palms pressed together, mascara already tracing tiny black rivers down her face. She didn't look at me. She looked at the floor, at the space between us like it had swallowed years. The neighbors clustered on their stoops in slippers and bathrobes, faces softened by sleep but bright with the hunger of spectators. One of them, Mrs. Alvarez, asked, "Is everything all right?" Her voice carried the ordinary cruelty of small towns, curiosity wrapped in the belief that the story was already told. They cuffed me with the practiced kindness of people who see this every week. "We'll need you to come with us," the officer said, and there was no choice in it. My wife mouthed something that could have been an apology or a script I'd never seen. My daughter, 10, hair in two crooked buns, pressed her face to the glass of her bedroom window and pointed at me as if teaching herself a lesson. Watching her finger tremble was the only part that hurt more than the loss of work, the humiliation, the way a single sentence turned my friends into strangers. In the back of the squad car I tried to map the moment where it all split, what lie had filled that space between us. They told me to be quiet, the radio hummed, a cop joked about paperwork. I pressed my forehead to the cool metal of the partition and made a small, selfish calculation: hold on to my voice. Tell the truth. Find the tape. There had to be a tape. There was always a tape. If there wasn't, I would make sure someone would one day hear what actually happened. They read the charge again at the precinct like a final verdict. People in the booking room looked through me the way a surgeon looks through skin to bone. I felt my name slip from my mouth and land somewhere cold and slippery, labeled. When they led me to a cell I whispered to the concrete, "I will make them listen. I will make them hear." They strip you of ordinary things first, the slow, surgical unmaking of a life that used to be invisible because it was ordinary. The week after the arraignment my phone became a stranger, messages stopped with polite delays and then with radio silence. People I'd eaten with for years stopped returning my calls as if voices could contaminate them. My boss called me into a conference room and talked about reputational risk like I was a spreadsheet error. The HR woman slid a separation agreement across the table with eyes that didn't look at mine. "We're sorry," she said. Her sorry felt like a warranty voided. My mother came once, left a casserole in the cooler, and left without sitting. "The children need quiet," she whispered, which meant, "We will pretend this didn't happen." My sister texted an emoji. My old friend started her sping "can't make it to weekends we used to share." Loneliness doesn't arrive all at once, it arrives in appointments cancelled, in invites that quietly stop, in people's names that your mouth learns not to call. It is a hard, patient erosion. The courts put conditions on my life like a leash: no unsupervised contact, weekly check-ins, a phone that was now monitored by anxiety. My daughter's visits were supervised and brief, a plastic hour that smelled faintly of antiseptic and the parenting class pamphlets the agency stapled to the clipboard. I learned how to smile for 45 minutes under fluorescent lights and hand her back like a package. She would press her forehead to mine, say "I miss you," and the city would rearrange itself around the truth, not mine, the one everyone wanted to keep. Every night I lay awake counting the practical losses, the bank accounts frozen, the job references that turned to silence, the email threads that turned to obituaries of friendship. But beneath that ledger of ruin something else grew, a quiet, meticulous awareness. In the gaps where people stopped listening, I started to listen harder, to inconsistencies, to times that didn't match, to a memory that refused to sit down quietly. The humiliation had stripped me bare, but shame is a poor shelter for truth. I began to map the parts that didn't fit, small, crooked pieces that would not rest until they were righted. Truth doesn't arrive with fanfare, it slips in through cracks you've stopped guarding. Mine came one rainy Thursday, 4 years after the trial. I was sorting old paperwork, half drunk on cheap whiskey and resentment, when a copy of the police report slid out of a folder. The date caught my eye, not the night she said I hit her, but the morning after. The report listed the time she called for help at 10:42 p.m. I remembered clearly that she'd left the house at 8:30 to get milk. I'd watched her taillights disappear. The timestamp didn't fit. It was small, maybe meaningless, but it felt wrong. Later that week, I stopped by the corner store out of habit, the same one she used to visit. The clerk, Raj, looked surprised to see me. "Hey," he said quietly, "I never told the cops she wasn't here that night." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer. "She came at 9, bought milk, and left with that guy again. The one with the gray car. They told me not to mention it, said it wasn't relevant." I walked home in the rain, the receipt from that night echoing in my head. Gray car. Not relevant. It was such a small thing, a missing 30 minutes, a forgotten detail, but when you've been buried alive, even a crack of light feels like a doorway. I pinned the police report to my wall and stared at it until the ink blurred. For the first time in years, I wasn't just remembering. I was investigating. The clerk at the records office looked like a man allergic to responsibility. His badge said T. Keller. His eyes said, "Don't make this my problem." I handed him the form requesting copies of all evidence logged under my case number. He scrolled through his computer with the lazy rhythm of someone pretending to work. Then he stopped. He murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "There's a note here, tape unavailable. Evidence destroyed." "Destroyed when?" I asked. He frowned, double-clicked, and the page refreshed. Doesn't say. Probably purged after 7 years. It's been 4. He blinked at me, unbothered. Then it must have been. Exceptional circumstances. That phrase, exceptional circumstances, echoed in my head all the way home. I remembered the prosecutor waiving the mention of a security tape during trial, swearing it proved nothing beyond doubt. Now it didn't even exist. That night I called my old public defender, Malik. He hesitated before speaking. "Off the record? That tape was never destroyed. It was sealed. Your wife's brother works at the DA's office, he signed the order." I tried to fight it, but he didn't need to finish. The silence filled in everything. So it hadn't been a clerical error. It had been surgery, clean, deliberate, efficient. They'd cut out the only piece of truth that could have saved me. I sat there with the phone in my lap, a soundless laugh crawling up my throat. I wasn't imagining the rot anymore, I was touching it. When I finally spoke, my voice came out steady. "If it was sealed," I said, "then I just need to learn how to unseal it." That was the first night in years I didn't dream of prison walls. I dreamed of paperwork, keys, and locks, of systems built by men, and therefore breakable. Courthouses have their own kind of cold. It isn't the air, it's the silence. The waiting rooms hum with lives on pause, people rehearsing stories no one will believe. I've been there before, once as the accused, now as a man asking the same court to admit it had been wrong. The clerk at the counter gave me the same look I'd seen 100 times, the weary disbelief reserved for men who can't let go of old cases. I slid the motion across the glass, a petition to unseal evidence. She stamped it without looking up. "You'll need to serve notice to the DA's office." Her tone said, "Good luck with that." 2 weeks later I sat in the back of the courtroom, watching my wife's brother, Assistant District Attorney Mark Collier, whisper to a junior lawyer. He hadn't aged well, guilt does that to a face. The judge read the paperwork, frowned, and asked, "Mr. Hale, what exactly do you expect to find?" "Just the truth," I said. "If it's gone, I want to see who signed it out." The DA objected, claiming I was wasting the court's time. But the judge, maybe out of boredom or a flicker of conscience, ordered them to produce the chain of custody. For a second, Collier's expression cracked, not panic, but calculation. I walked out into the frozen parking lot and let the wind bite through my coat. For the first time in years, I felt the weight shift, almost imperceptibly. Someone inside that building had just realized I wasn't going away. That night, Malik called. "They're moving fast," he said. "Files are being pulled, people are nervous. Whatever's in that tape. They don't want it found." I watched the snow collect on the windowsill and thought of that courtroom silence, how it had once buried me. The next time I stood there, it would bury someone else. His name was Dylan Cross. We used to share a basement apartment and too many bottles of whiskey back when life was simpler, before I became the headline everyone whispered about. He'd gone private after leaving the force, the kind of work cops pretend they don't do but always end up needing. When I called, he didn't say no. He just said, "You finally ready to look under the right rocks?" We met at a diner on the edge of town. The kind of place where secrets felt comfortable sitting in cracked leather booths. Dylan looked older, his hair thinner, his eyes still too sharp for their own good. He slid a small recorder across the table. "Start from the beginning," he said, lighting a cigarette despite the sign that said not to. I told him everything, the night, the tape, the court order, Collier's name. He listened without interruption, then nodded once. "If that tape's sealed, someone left a trail. Nobody hides evidence cleanly. They hide it lazily." Within a week, he had copies of internal memos, emails, timestamps. The DA's office had logged the tape twice, once during intake, once during transfer, but there was no record of destruction. It had simply vanished into a temporary evidence locker that didn't officially exist. We sat in his car one night, watching the courthouse lights blink off one by one. "You realize," he said, "if we find this, you're not the only one who burns." I nodded. "Good." He smiled faintly. "You haven't changed much." "I had to," I said. "They didn't leave much worth keeping." When he dropped me off, he handed me a folder. Inside was a printout, a security manifest showing the last access badge to open that locker. The name printed on it made my chest tighten. Emily Collier. My wife. By February, Dylan's apartment looked like a crime scene made of paper. Coffee cups, folders, cigarette ash, timelines pinned to the wall with red string that crisscrossed names like arteries. Each night he'd pour 2 fingers of bourbon and say, "We're close," the way men talk to themselves when they're afraid to believe it. The pattern was there, we just had to see it. The police report, the missing tape, the sealed file, all of it orbited around one name, Collier. Every time the evidence chain kinked, every time a form was backdated or an affidavit went missing, his digital signature appeared somewhere nearby. Dylan found an internal memo from the DA's office labeled Emergency Evidence Review. It was dated 3 days before my trial, signed off by Collier and 2 detectives. The attached document listed Video Exhibit C, the same tape that was supposedly destroyed, but next to it, a handwritten note, "Do not play in court, compromised audio." Compromised audio. That meant someone had heard it. We tracked one of the detectives down, a man named Russo, retired, living in a trailer 2 counties over. He didn't open the door until Dylan flashed his old badge. "You don't know what you're stirring," he warned. But when he saw my face, something in him softened. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," he said. "We were told to keep the tape sealed, that it would confuse the jury." The DA made it sound routine. "What was on it?" I asked. He hesitated, eyes darting to the TV behind me like he could hide in its glow. "Your wife's voice. And another man's. They were arguing. Then she says, 'He's not even here.'" The silence after that sentence felt like gravity. The world tilted. Dylan pressed stop on his recorder, exhaled, and said quietly, "That's enough to bury them." I stared at Russo's trembling hands. "Not yet," I said. "We let them walk me into a cage. I'm not giving them a courtroom. I'm giving them an execution, by truth." The waiting was worse than any courtroom. Hunger has an honesty to it, waiting is a slow erosion with no finality, just the ticking of clocks that pretend to be impartial. Nights became laboratories for what I could not say aloud. I found myself listening to ordinary sounds, the fridge motor, a distant dog barking, a radiator that clicked like a metronome, and inventing stories to explain them. Each sound was a small accusation or a small absolution, and I catalogued them both. I started carrying the folder with the manifest everywhere, like a talisman. At the laundromat I smoothed its edges between loads, on the bus I laid it on my knee and watched people's jackets like they might hide evidence. Friends who still spoke to me saw only a man patient to a fault. I saw a man practicing calendars, rehearsing the day I would no longer be patient. People called me brave once. Brave is a polite word for someone who has nothing left to lose. There were nights when I woke, raw and hollow, and imagined turning back. Love is not a tidy thing, it is a map with burned out routes and invisible bridges. I thought about the woman I married before the arguments, before legal pads and court dates. I thought about my daughter's small, blunt trust. The revenge I was planning tasted of ash in those moments. I did not pretend the coming storm would heal anything. Justice is not medicine. It is a reckoning, cold, precise, necessary if you want the truth to have teeth. Dylan kept telling me to slow down. Malik said subpoenas would work faster than anger. I smiled at both of them with the practiced softness of someone trying on forgiveness like a coat that did not fit. Inside, I kept making lists: who needed to be shown the tape, who needed to be removed from power, who needed to feel the hush I'd lived under. Each list read like a ledger, and ledgers, unlike memories, can be balanced. On the last clear night before we moved, I went to my daughter's window and watched her sleep. Her face was the same as it had been the first night they took me, small and unknowing and entirely mine in a way no court could touch. I pressed my palm flat to the cold glass and whispered only one thing: I will not fail you again. Then I went home and slept like a man who has finally given his dark work a name. Tomorrow would be execution by truth. The courtroom smelled of paper and old wood polish, the same air I'd breathed the first time they said my name like a curse. Only this time, the fear wasn't mine. Collier sat at the prosecution table, jaw tight, knuckles white against his notes. My wife was behind him, a ghost in beige, trying to look composed but shrinking every time the word tape was spoken. Malik stood beside me, calm in that way only tired men can be. Once it starts, he whispered, don't say a word. Let the sound do the talking. The clerk pressed play. For a moment, nothing. Just the hum of background noise, the faint whine of a cheap microphone. Then, her voice. My wife's. Clear, agitated, breathless. He's not even here, Mark. You said he wouldn't find out. A pause, the sound of a man, Collier, replying, low, furious, we just need them to believe it. It's one night. After that, it's done. Gasps moved through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows knotted. My wife's hands went to her mouth. Collier stood, shouting about context, about privacy, about how the tape was doctored, but the sound kept rolling, her sobbing, his voice telling her to stick to the story, and then the slam of a door. When the clip ended, the silence was unbearable. I looked at the jury box, the same kind of faces that once condemned me without hesitation. Now, not one of them could meet my eyes. The judge turned to Collier, voice low but sharp as a blade. Mr. Collier, I advise you to sit down before you say something you can't unsay. My wife was crying, but I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt nothing. Just the slow, cold collapse of everything that had stolen my life. Outside, reporters were already waiting. Microphones, flashes, chaos, but their noise couldn't reach me. For the first time in years, I didn't have to speak. The truth had spoken for me. When Dylan appeared beside the car, he grinned without humor. Well, he said, you got your silence. Yeah, I replied. And now they get theirs. They called it a scandal in the papers, a slow-motion unraveling with bylines that tried to sound shocked and bored at once. The DA took an unpaid leave. Mark Collier resigned before they could drag him out. His face on the courthouse steps looked like a man who'd been unmade in public. My wife's name ran in the feeds for a week, whispers about motives, about affairs, about convenience. People rearranged their moral furniture to make room for new opinions. Old friends texted cautious condolences, some asked if I wanted to speak on camera. I said nothing to most of them. Words felt cheap when the ledger had already been tallied. The court vacated my conviction in a spare hearing where the judge used slow, careful language, procedural irregularities, tainted evidence, phrases meant to soften a simple truth: they had been wrong and someone had lied. They offered apologies that read like legal drafts. Collier's brother in the DA's office was suspended pending review. The detectives who'd signed off on the purge were reassigned. People lost jobs, pensions, reputations. The men who had once moved like gods across the courtroom were reduced to small, human things: telephone calls unanswered, legal bills, the ache of being watched. But the wreckage left on my side did not roll back like tidewater. My name was cleared, yet the job I'd had was gone. Clients would not call. Some families would not open their doors. My daughter's first question, months later, was practical: will you come to my recital? I went. I sat in the auditorium smelling dust and hope, and when she saw me she smiled the way children do, pure and unbothered by the politics of adults. That smile was a small, furious victory I'd carry like a coin. I thought revenge would feel like heat, hot and blinding. Instead it was a series of surgical cuts. People's lives were rearranged, Collier's career collapsed, the DA's office had to write memos about oversight and ethics training. Justice, when it comes late, reads like paperwork and internal audits. It is not cinematic. It is tedious and necessary. The men who'd built my cage did not walk into flames, they navigated internal reviews and reputational damage. But they no longer walked free in public with their heads high. At night, when I returned to the small apartment that was mine again, I kept the folder Dylan had given me on the table. It smelled faintly of smoke and ink, a reminder that truth requires a witness, and a witness sometimes wears the face of a man you once shared a roof with. I learned to live with the other price of vindication, the knowledge that exposing someone's lie will break more than the liar. It will crack families, careers, and sometimes children's sense of safety. I had not wanted to wound my daughter's life with the same story. I had wanted to give her back the father who could sit at her recital without flinching. That, in the end, is what justice became for me, a quiet reclamation. People asked if I forgave. Forgiveness is a private transaction. It is not required for the ledger to balance. I walked past Collier once in the courthouse lobby months later. He did not look at me. I did not look at him. There was no final speech, no dramatic collapse, only two men who had survived the same machine in different ways. Outside, the city moved on, and I moved with it, carrying the scars of what was done and the brittle, careful pride that comes from knowing the truth, no matter how late, can still make a room fall silent.